Okay, looks like we're connected. Be ready to go in less than a minute. Okay, let's start. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. So, for the next 4 sessions, I want to talk about the Brahma Viharas. These are the 4 divine abidings, and we'll start with Mettā. First of all, just to briefly note about the Brahma Viharas in general. The name Brahma Vihara means divine abidings. Brahma, of course, references the Brahma gods, but it's also used just generally as a in an adjectival form to mean like celestial or divine. And Vihara is a dwelling place, a home. And the Buddha said that the wise person always dwells in the Brahma Viharas. So some modern commentators have referred to them as the skillful emotions, and I think that's not a bad characterization. And what this means, the wise person always dwells in the Brahma Viharas, means that these 4 mental states are the only truly or perfectly skillful emotions that are not marked by any kind of defilement. Metta, Karuna, Mudita are all variations on a theme. Upekkha is a bit different and separate, and we'll deal with that in due course. Let's talk about Mettā. Now, as often is the case when we're dealing with the Buddhist teachings, we have to be somewhat critical or wary of the translations, because it's too easy just to rely on the English wording. If that's what the language we use, that's what we're familiar with. And it may have misleading connotations. It may not exactly convey what's meant in the Pali. The translation for Mettā that is almost universal is loving kindness. And I am somewhat critical of this this translation for a number of reasons. For one, I think it sounds too kind of sentimental, and that makes it off-putting to some people. If we look at the way Mettā is described, it's a earnest wish that beings be well and happy. So I think a better or closer translation, there's probably no one word that's perfect, but a closer English word might be benevolence. That we wish beings be well and happy. So we have to distinguish this from, although we could say it's a form of love, we have to distinguish it from what is, commonly thought of as love. Having metta towards a being does not imply, number one, it doesn't imply that we approve of the being's behavior or think that there's some paragon of virtue, it doesn't imply, number two, it doesn't imply that we like them, in the sense that we don't don't necessarily want to associate with them. All it means is, may this being be well and happy. I like to cite the example of a parita chant, a protection chant that we used to do in the jungle in Thailand, and many of the Western monks humorously refer to it as the creepy crawly chant. The chant wishes metta to snakes and scorpions and spiders and all these sorts of undesirable creatures. And it says, may you be well and happy, may all good things come for you, but may you stay well away from me. And I think that's the attitude of metta, that we don't we wish well on all beings, but we don't necessarily want to be around them. You can have metta for a scorpion. It doesn't mean that you want to pick it up and cuddle it in your sleeping bag. This is this is not metta. Each of the Brahma Viharas is said to have a near enemy and a far enemy. The far enemy is the opposite mental state. It's easy to recognize. For metta, well-being, well-wishing, benevolence is opposed by hatred, ill will, which is wishing ill on a person. I hope that person loses all his money. I hope he falls down and breaks his leg, etc. That would be ill wishing or ill will. It's the obvious opposite. The near enemy is a mental state that shares some characteristic with metta, but is somewhat corrupted by defilement. It's a counterfeit. So metta has a near enemy of partial affection. You have if you have metta for some class of beings but not others. Another name for the Brahma Viharas in general is the boundless states, apamana, without limit or without boundary. And what this means is that for any of the Brahma Viharas to be really effective spiritually, one must extend them to all beings without discrimination. That there cannot be a class of beings that is excluded. It has to be universal. I run into one person. I was talking about metta, and he said, I can have metta for all beings except mosquitoes. Well, it's no good. That doesn't work. One has to have universal metta. And there are different ways of developing metta as a meditation. And this general scheme will work for the first three Brahma Viharas as well, with just the appropriate change. The two, and there are, I would say that there are actually many varieties of meditation that people do that are called metta, and it's really not that there's one perfect method. It's whatever brings up that mental state for you and works. Some people rely more on visualization, some on chanting, and so on. But I think the key is that the proper object of the meditation is that emotional state, is that feeling of benevolence or well-wishing that arises internally. That said, that there are two kind of general approaches with lots of variations. One is to develop metta towards a specific list of individuals, and the other method is general pervasion, to spread it out in all directions. These two different methods of developing metta have somewhat different effects. They feel different. The method developed towards specific individuals is probably the better one for developing a deep samadhi, stillness of mind. Although it's not really possible using metta to go beyond first jhana, it's still it's more focused, having individual persons that you're developing metta towards. Now, the traditional list is to begin with someone you recognize as a teacher, then to extend metta to your parents, your mother and father, if and only if they are still alive. Otherwise, you skip that step. Then to send metta towards a dear friend. Then to send metta towards a neutral person, someone you can put a name and face to, but you don't really have feelings about them one way or the other. And the last is towards an enemy, which means someone who has done you wrong or makes you feel ill will when you bring them up, and you're trying to counter that. And the perfection of the practice is when the feeling of metta is equal or the same across all four categories for for yourself. Which I think I neglected to mention that it's very important you start with yourself. I'll get back to that point. You start with yourself, then your parents, and then you go through the rest of the list. So you have the same feeling of metta towards yourself, towards the dear friend, the neutral person, and the enemy. And there's no difference between them. This is a very big benefit of this form of metta is the specific excuse me, the specific diminishment of ill will is a way of overcoming ill will. So returning to that point, beginning with yourself, you always, whenever you do, wishing the metta towards yourself, your own being. I would suggest, sitting in the meditation posture, to begin by breathing with the consciousness at the chest, the heart chakra position, and raising up the contemplation, may I be well and happy. And you just wish well towards yourself. A lot of people, numerous people have difficulties with their own self-view, that they have a negative opinion of themselves. They're hard on themselves. It's not healthy, and it's very important that you work that out. Um, um, it's not possible to have metta towards anybody else if you don't have it towards yourself first. And I would say it's also not possible to, if you truly raise metta towards yourself, it's not possible to stop there, because it's such a overflowing emotion that it's impossible to contain it within the one being. You'll naturally begin to feel benevolence towards everybody else once you feel benevolence towards yourself. So beginning with yourself, then a teacher, then your parents, then a dear friend, a neutral person, and an enemy. Now, as I mentioned briefly, there are two classes of persons that we exclude from choosing for the list. One is dead persons, because if the dead person is in the ghost realm and you're extending metta towards them, it doesn't help them. It causes them to hang around. They're attracted to the metta, and they're not. It doesn't help them to move on. There is a proper practice for honoring the deceased, and that is the making of merit, the transferring of merit. It's not offering metta to them. So you avoid dead persons. The second category is for this exercise, using a specific list of beings. You should not choose any being who might cause you to arouse sexual desire. So whatever the appropriate gender and age category is, you will then corrupt the metta if it's mixed up with sensuality, and so you avoid that category of beings, whatever it might be in an individual case. I can't resist sharing an anecdote of a third category of beings that applies in modern times. There was a monk that I know was traveling, and he was sitting in the airport waiting for his flight, and to make good use of the time, he sat there practicing metta, and he was doing it by extending it to individuals as they were walking around the airport. He would see somebody walking around, and he wished, may this being be well and happy. And one of the security people came by with a sniffer dog, it sniffs out explosives or drugs, and he wished metta to the dog, and the dog came over and nuzzled him. So then he was in a bit of trouble. Come to the back room. We got to have a little talk. So you need to exclude dead persons who arouse lust, and also dope sniffing dogs. It's good to avoid. The second way of developing metta is called general pervasion. And again, you begin with yourself. You begin, may I be well and happy. But then you begin extending it outwards in increasingly large circles. So may all the beings in this house, and include humans, animals, insects, may they all be well and happy. And then you go out to the neighborhood, and to the village or town, and the around the countryside, just going out in increasingly large circles. And there's a myriad of variations of ways people do this. And, one way is to use a visualization. Imagine rays coming from your heart chakra and extending outwards to increasingly large circles. And to run over in your mind different categories of beings that you're including. May all human beings, may all animals, birds, fish, insects, devas, and here we can include spirits as well. We're not aiming at individuals, so we're not excluding anybody from this exercise because we're not focused so intently on an individual. So you say, may all the ghosts, may all the human beings, male and female, young and old, birds, animals, insects, the fish in the sea, and keep extending it outwards until you incorporate first the entire earth, then the entire universe, and you're radiating to infinity. And this is truly the boundless state. So you're radiating metta out into boundless space. And I would, and that's the mature form of the meditation. Once you get there, you can try to hold that as long as you can. And then I would advise before ending the meditation to then collapse it inwards again. You could do it in much faster stages, but bring it back from infinity to this earth, to this country, to this town, to this house, to me. So and end with a few breaths at the heart. So that you are grounded at the end. You bring it back in. Once you're extended, you extend the meditation to infinite space. There is a development from that point. You can then switch to doing formless meditation. You're extending metta to boundless space. You can stop doing metta and just pay attention to boundless space, and that gets you in the first step of the four formless contemplations. So as I said, there's lots of variations of ways of doing a metta meditation. Metta meditation is good for everybody. Everybody can do it, and it feels good. It's particularly useful or recommended for people who have a lot of anger or ill will, because it's the antidote to that. And I will say that I've noticed over the years that the people that really need to do metta, they often have a resistance to it. They often have a resistance to it. They don't want to do it. And part of, not the whole of it, but part of the problem might be that what I mentioned at the outset, the English translation is loving kindness. For someone who's kind of hard bitten and cold-hearted, and they really need to do metta, to call it loving kindness, it sounds too kind of soft and sentimental for their taste. They don't want to go there. People who are naturally full of loving kindness, of benevolence, they love doing metta. They don't really need it as much, but it certainly is useful. It's good for everybody. But it's the people who have anger and ill will who need to do it that will have a resistance to doing it. If you're one of those kinds of persons, I would encourage you to get over your issues and begin practicing metta. You'll find it has a wonderful beneficial effects on the psyche. There's a list I think it's in the Anguttara Nikaya, of the 18 benefits of doing metta, and they include he becomes dear to human beings and non-human beings, and this is very true. When people take up the practice of metta, often they experience that other people then become more kindly and good natured towards them, because they're radiating metta and it comes back to them. And it disarms aggressors and angry people, because there's nowhere for the anger to and aggression to find a footing. Another set of benefits is he sleeps easily, he wakes easily, and he dreams no evil dreams. So metta is very useful to do in the evening before going to sleep. So what else to say about it? I think I've pretty well covered most of the ground of a basic basic discussion of the Brahmavihara of Mettā, and I'll stop there and see what we got in the questions. Let's see. Interesting that you mentioned sentimental, Bhante, as in at least one translation of the near enemy framework, sentimentality is depicted as a near enemy. Yes, yeah. I would say that's not, yeah, I think I recognize that, and that's not bad. It seems that wishing other people to be happy works far better than mudita when I'm envious of them. Why metta instead of mudita does work against envy? Well, we'll get to mudita. We'll, have a discussion of mudita coming up. But the general idea is mudita overcomes envy. Like if you see people having good fortune and you're jealous of it, then that's an unwholesome mind state. You're encouraged to rejoice at their good fortune. It may be that metta works for you because it's actually a simpler, less complex, let's say, mental state. Question. I meditate on metta by remembering the love of my parents. I do feel embraced with love that lasts a few times. How can I feel metta for longer periods? I also practice loving my parents. Well, you need to extend it from beyond your parents. Like, it's good that you have it for your parents, but you need to go on to making it universal, and establish it first of all for yourself. This is very important. If you're missing that step, then it won't be very solid. And then to take it even to the enemy class of persons. That's when you really have some perfection in metta. I have heard the Buddha himself never used the term Brahmavihara, that it is not so called in the suttas, only apamana. Isn't Brahmavihara misleading, as it were place rather than states? I'm actually, that's an interesting comment. I'm not actually sure of that. I'll have to maybe investigate that. If the word Brahmavihara as such is commentarial, it might be. I'm not saying you're wrong. I don't know. But using Vihara to represent a state is not wrong. It's a kind of metaphorical, a dwelling place. In a mundane sense, dwelling place is four walls and a door. That's your vihara. But where you hold your mind is your internal dwelling place. Does an offering or transfer of merit to a peta just help them or liberate them from that realm? Well, it helps them immediately, and the idea is that eventually it'll let them escape from that realm, because they'll have some ease and they have a possibility to move on. It doesn't immediately liberate them. You can't really liberate them. You can't really liberate anybody. You can only help them in some way. Dogs again prove themselves to be man's best friend. Yes. In that case, a bit too friendly. In Majjimas 46 and 52, it says 4 jhanas, 3 arupas, 4 Brahma Viharas are the 11 doors to the deathless. If one is in them and sees these states as conditioned and impermanent, then they are extinguished right there. Does this contradict the distinct samatha vipassana model? No, the samatha vipassana model is really a distinction that was more developed after the Buddha's time. It's more of a commentarial thing. And I think that's been a tendency in Buddhism and in over the centuries, is to put things into more hard and fast categories than the Buddha's original approach. So, I think the Buddha was much more open and less kind of structured, mechanically structured in his teaching. You can see in this particular list you're citing, that there's many doors to the deathless. Do you have any thoughts on Ajahn Vimarasali's TWIM method of samatha meditation? I don't have any comment because I have no idea what it is. He says he instructs people to use metta to attain all jhanas, but you said metta only takes you to first jhana. Yeah, I believe that, and that is the position in the commentary in the Visuddhimagga, that metta can only lead to first jhana, and I see the logic behind that, because you're using vitakka vichara. You're using thought formation to rouse up that state. So I'm not really sure that would be possible to translate that into the higher jhanas. I actually feel superior to others. Not right, I know, because I don't treat them like crap, nor look as hideous as they while treating me like crap. Yeah, okay, that's a comment, not a question. Why in the suttas the Buddha often talked about metta as pervading east, west, north, south, etc.? How to practice that kind of metta? I would say that the 4 directions, the 4 cardinal directions, that's a variant of doing general privation, and that's a way it works quite well for many people. You, instead of going out in circles, you kind of sweep out with your mind to the north, to the east, to the west, to the south. I actually kind of like that method myself, but it's also I would say that you just by happenstance, I happen to be living not too far off of the dead center of the continent, so I kind of got room to the east, west, north, and south to spread my metta. Were there other Theravada schools other than Mahavihara what names using the Pali text when referring to their own school. I did a whole series of videos on early Theravada history. You can probably find them on my channel. It's a complicated story, and there were other schools, but the all current Theravada bhikkhus in whatever country they're in, it seems to be that all of our lineages are tangled, but they trace back to the Mahavihara in Sri Lanka. That was a very important center. There was another rival monastery, the Abhayagiri, in Sri Lanka, that was also existent for a long time. And the name Theravada was not used originally. It was the first as a distinguished school. Probably we could date it to the Third Council, when the issue at hand at the Third Council was between the Sarvastivada monks, who held that the three times, past, present, and future, exist, and the monks who distinguished between the three times. And they were called Vibhajyawadins, which means the school of analysis or of discrimination. And they were really the ancestors of Theravada. What difference metta from similar practice of theistic religion to develop goodwill towards all creation? I think there's a great deal of similarity. There's, for example, in Christianity, there's the concept of agape, universal love, which sounds very, very similar to metta. You said that Abhayagiri sect in Sri Lanka had Mahayana tendencies, but I read they were based on an early school called the Mahisasaka, from which the Dharmaguptaka came. Can you explain? Yeah, there was a lot of influences back and forth in ancient India. The distinction between the early schools and the Mahayana was not as hardly defined in the early days, and they would pick up ideas from the Mahayana. The Abhayagiri seem to have been much more, as compared to Mahavihara, they seem to have been much more eclectic in their approach and more kind of open to outside ideas, whereas the Mahavihara took a stand on orthodoxy and staying with tradition. They were the more conservative branch. So there were Mahayana influences. I wouldn't say that they would, they went outright Mahayana, but they were open to Mahayana ideas. Any advice or helpful tricks for developing metta for oneself? I tuned in late. You may have already said it. No, Dinka, I don't think I went into particular methods of doing that. You need to keep it simple. Just basically stick with that benevolence. May I be well and happy, and don't allow any kind of judgmentalness to come in. I think one kind of reflection that is useful is, we tend to be very self-critical and hard on ourselves, but you would not be as hard on somebody else. You're kind of get away from a self position and just see this being who's sitting here, may he or she be well and happy, and just keep it simple to that. Don't try and get into a long thing about forgiving yourself or letting go of regrets or complicating it in any way. Just, may I be happy? May I be well? Just keep it as simple as that. What are the near enemy of metta and what are its opposites? The near enemy is either partial affection or sentimentality. It's the kind of having wishing well, but having it corrupted by this kind of partiality or sentimentality. Like if you find it easier to have metta towards a cute kitten than towards a scorpion, then it's not the perfection of metta. That with the perfection of metta, there's no difference. And the opposite is clearly ill will, hatred. Was metta practiced by non-Buddhists at the time of the Buddha? Probably, but I'm not sure about that. I'm not as well versed in the non-Buddhist literature. I don't know if some equivalent was mentioned specifically in other texts. When Ted asks, when practicing this meditation, do you have mental image of the person and go through each person like a carousel, or you just let the rays go to that person? Whichever way works for you. I know some people have told me that they actually visualize the person sitting on, cross-legged in front of them, facing them. I don't find, I don't find that kind of elaborate visualization useful myself. But I'll bring up an image of the person's face and wish that, so I have a reference point and wish may this person be well and happy. Other people use that, they imagine actually rays traveling physically to the person. You can experiment if the actual details of the practice is not important. What's important is you get that feeling going. That's the real proper point. What if I hate something to the extent that it hurts what I love? I'm not sure I understand that. You shouldn't hate anything, but I'm not sure that sentence structure. I'm not sure what you mean. Now, I am surrounded by family members who are negative. Can I do metta each time I see them, other than doing it on the cushion? Yeah, that's actually brings up a kind of a broader issue. You develop metta as a formal meditation, sitting down on the cushion, as you say. That way, you can kind of establish that state and you know what it feels like and be familiar with it. And if you're good at it, you can bring it up in the social situations. You can bring metta forward and overcome that negativity. Will practice of metta keep you in the sensual realm? No. In fact, it leads to the Brahma realm. If you develop perfection of the practice, it leads to rebirth in Brahma realm. Okay, I'm going to, I think, wrap it up. Let's just see if there's one or two more that I feel like answering. Translations of Buddhist Pali terms in English is problematic since many were chosen more than 100 years ago. I like benevolence for metta. I also for goodwill. Yeah, goodwill is not bad either. Yes, you're quite right, and there's an understandable tendency, I think, that once a term gets translated, it gets stuck. That uh, one speaker and writer after another uses it. It becomes more and more established, and we lose sight of the original. Okay, so I think I'll leave it there, and may you all be well and happy, and we'll see you next time.